Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Kimberly and Hildegan, for having me, and it's a real honor to be speaking with everyone here today. So I'm going to respond to the title of this symposium overall, and the theme of this panel with two case studies taken from my practical experience, which we can explore in more detail in the discussion session. So I'll start with one of the core tenets that defined Ibraaz, a publishing platform focused on visual cultures emanating from in and around North Africa and the Middle East, which actively published from 2011 to 2017. One of our main strands were essays, conversations, and artist projects, which we published around 6-month and 1-year-long research questions. Editorially, we operated with one key idea, that the practice comes first. One of the first things that Editor-in-Chief Anthony Downey told me when I came on board in 2012. This idea that the practice comes first was especially important when Ibraaz was launched, as uprisings unfolded across the Arab world, starting in December 2010 in Tunis, where the Kamel Lazar Foundation, which founded and supports Ibraaz, is based. Excuse me. There is, of course, a decolonial rationale to this methodology. Ibraaz functioned on the principle that an artist's practice comes first in order to counter the colonial gaze, the kind that reduces an artist into a mouthpiece for another agenda, be it culturally diplomatic, commercial, or political. This is something that happened a lot when artists from the Arab world began to be consistently framed as spokespeople for the so-called Arab Spring, itself a term that was inscribed with colonialist dynamics. So the decolonial position in this sense would be to have the practice speak for itself and to follow the nuances of its making. And from there, we knew that the politics would emerge. And the position is important because it supposes that there is no frame to begin with, or one that is not yet discernibly clear, while acknowledging the tendency to frame as an impulse that drives that logic. I think this is why Ibraaz's final 1-year platform before pausing publication asked a simple question. I guess it's not on the loop. Where to now? Sorry. Yeah, so we asked where to now. After all, we had spent 5 years of mediating a constant flow of responses to various urgent and timely questions emanating from the region, from the current conditions of institutional practice to the contemporary and historical relationships between North Africa, the Middle East, and the wider global South, which of course draws in histories of the Bandung, the non-aligned movement, and as Diana mentioned, all of these unsung connections, or perhaps forgotten connections, or connections that haven't quite managed to align in the present. So this relates to the title of this discussion, Rewriting Art History, or Writing Art History, Who Does It, Where, and How. Through the example of Ibraaz, I would say that everyone who contributed to the production of what is now a free and online archive of content charting the development of visual cultures in and around the Arab world over a very specific 5-year period, a history you might call it, I would say that everyone wrote, rewrote, or challenged history in some way. A very clear example would be Shiva Balagi's essay challenging the common dismissal of Shirin Neshat's practice as a result of her market success and the tropes that have, since she first started using them, become, as it has been said, passé, which actually limits the parameters with which we're able to engage with her work. In so many instances, the stories our contributors told or wanted to tell resisted ghettoizing narratives in favor of readings that sought to open up meanings and particularities so as to link context and visual cultures with others. Artist Anahita Razmi presented a project based on the movement of Iranian men to Japan and back in the 80s and 90s. Monira Al-Qadiri wrote an essay about how a Japanese translation of the Quran, Monira Al-Qadiri wrote an essay about how a Japanese translation of the Quran in 1958 taught her about Islam. Stories opened up pathways to new ones while simultaneously drawing unexpected or unsung connections. Leung Shiwa spoke to Robin Peckham about a work he produced for the 4th Marrakesh Biennial in 2012, a video installation whose audio soundtrack consists of a dialogue that was written based on the experience of 2 Moroccan women who lived in Hong Kong, while artist Sama Hijawi interviewed curators Rasha Salti and Christine Khoury about the incredible feat of research that they did around the International Exhibition for Palestine in 1978, organized by the PLO and a reflection of an international network of solidarity that stretched from Italy through to Japan. In many ways, Ibraaz was a wayfinding mission. The structure we had from the foundation that funded us down to the editorial approaches that we took facilitated as free a flow of testimonies as possible. The idea being that our work would result in an archive that could double as a document of the present and an ongoing conversation in the future. But that is not to say the platform didn't come without its issues. This brings me to another aspect of framing that relates to one of the things about Ibraaz's position that was and is naturally treated with suspicion. That this is a project funded by a single foundation, created by a private individual, which raises questions of what agenda such a project might follow. Not to mention that we publish purely in English, mainly in English. Excuse me. So to respond, I can say that the team was given full freedom to commission and publish whatever we wanted, actually. And very rarely did I actually engage with KLF. And likewise, our editorial approach was hands-off. Our priority was to facilitate the expression and articulation of ideas and testimonies that textured our understanding of present events, art histories, and artistic practices, and at times challenging them. And in many ways, our structure was designed to feel like there was no structure, which is actually a great description, I guess, of that invisible hand of capitalism. Which is to say that this doesn't gloss over the fact that Ibraaz was funded by a single foundation, though it does say something of the various registers of complicity when we actually think about the politics of our creative labor and decolonial work. And of course, the interests that intersect along the way. It also brings me to another practical example of what you might call a mediator of some kind of historical rewriting, the Conversations program at Art Basel in Hong Kong, a fair that can, on paper, appear lodged deep in the belly of the global art market, one located in a city with a history as a British colony, a free port, a Chinese protectorate, an ongoing capitalist experiment, now possibly capito-communist, a city where I was born and raised. The Conversations program in Hong Kong, which I work on, is by all accounts complicit, as am I. In fact, Guerrilla Girls came to the city and did a basic headcount at the fair in 2018, part of their presentation in Asia Art Archive's Women Make Art History. And they counted 76% of total artists shown in the fair were men, 30% of the galleries showed 0 women, and 29% showed only 1 woman. Of course, such numbers are not unique in Hong Kong and are indicative of a larger global problem. And those in the field do what they can, in whatever position they find themselves in, to challenge the status quo, if they are so inclined. In 2018, for example, our Conversations program was made completely open to the public for free, and we counted a tally not included in the Guerrilla Girls count of 66 women and 50 men in this schedule. An incredible constellation of people from across Asia and beyond who came together to share their knowledge of working in the culture industry not only with each other, but with the audience. Conversations are devised in close collaboration with our Asia director, the Basel team, and the network of practitioners who are engaged in the network. At all points, we try to remain conscious of the program's position as an economically instrumentalized site of cultural discourse, produced from a Western and capitalist structure that does not come untainted with colonialist dynamics. A global art fair positioned in Asia, a region that has been fast-forwarding out of the ashes of the 20th century into the future, not to mention the embodiment of global free market capitalism. But in truth, the Conversations occupies a peculiar space in Art Basel's program. In all 3 fairs, you could say that we are the public arm. For one, all of our panels are recorded, live streamed, and available on YouTube, sometimes within hours of the event. And there is simultaneous translation available in every language. So this is not a defense of what Art Basel represents on a larger scale and the impact of such models have on local art scenes or on the market in general. Not to mention the hierarchies it produces through the creation of a global class. Simply, it acknowledges the fact that this is but one perspective of an infinite number of others that apply to a place like Art Basel in Hong Kong. Not limited to the issues that come with the market and the multitude of stakeholders that are connected to its global enterprise. And also our position takes into account that an art fair isn't just about the market. It is about the cultural traditions, politics, and histories that crosshatch openly and quite explicitly for the few days that the event runs. It is an overwhelming cross-sectional microcosm of a wider world that, when the fair closes, remains networked by an intricate system we know as the art world, this trans-global community. To that end, if I were to apply the question of this panel to Art Basel, I would not say Art Basel writes history, but its structure facilitates the production of it. This is very much the idea that feeds into the conversations program at the fair, and it's a space that offers a great chance to reflect on the narratives that has defined the world through the many relations that have brought people together and apart. On one panel we staged in 2018 on decolonizing ethnography was a really good example of this. It had Xiaowei Cai, Yi Ilan, Gala Porras Kim, Lisa Rehana, who most recently represented New Zealand at the Venice Biennial, with a vivid audio-visual telling of the colonial landings at the turn of the 19th century, using the 19th century French scenic wallpaper known as Captain Cook's Voyages. There was a great moment in the question and answer session of this panel when someone from the audience asked why no men were included. And, I remember thinking, why should there have been? Sometimes it's that simple. But it does go deeper than that if you take into account what Fred Inglis has said about culture being the study of power. In the Foucauldian sense, power is a material force that is produced, maintained, and imposed by a consenting body of individuals, values, and systems. By that definition, art is a domain where you're not only able to study power, but also participate in its production and mediation. Fragmentation, valuation, circulation, everything, the renegotiation of it as well, while observing its effects, and perhaps even affecting them in turn, sometimes in the most subtle of ways. In fact, each artist on the panel described certain strategies and tactics that focused on co-opting languages, systems, and forms of defining in order to tell more nuanced stories. More nuanced stories. As Yi Ilan put it when talking about the violence of admin, her concern is not so much history as it is about the tools and methods of power and how it is learned, because that is really what it all comes down to, representation and the struggle to participate in the production of its meaning. In this field, keeping things open enough for discussion is what counts. Gala Porras Kim touched on this idea when thinking about the theme of the conversation, decolonizing ethnography, and how it applies to her own research, and I'm both quoting and paraphrasing her here. It is not about writing history from a top-down view, such as male or global north, but from an individual domestic perspective. A democratic way of looking at our shared history that acknowledges the fact that the representation of history is almost impossible to achieve given the multitude of views constituting historical experience. And I think Atlam's work actually really speaks to this. The suggestion here is that while a representation of history is almost impossible, a democratic attempt at knowing history is, which brings me to my final stand on this talk's title, that all of the components of the art world participate in the unwieldy and ongoing discourse we call art history. And by that virtue, they contribute to its writing. It's a very predictable answer, but it doesn't make it any less true. Thank you. Sorry.